You're live.
I'm live. Hi everyone. My name is Gavin Nichols. I'm a technical artist at Soma Games, and today I wanted to give a talk just about PBR, what it is, why we like it, why we're using it, where it came from, all sort of like kind of an overview of the technical aspects of rendering and where the industry is heading, why we're going there, you know, just all of that. I mean, that's my job, is technical stuff and art and making things look cool, and so yeah, this is a thing that I like. So Emily's going to be in chat, and she'll be passing on any questions you guys have to me, so go ahead and if you have any questions at any point, go ahead and ask them. I'll do my best to answer as we go along, any points of clarification or anything. But yeah, I guess we should get started. So, you know, just hi, hope y'all are doing well. Let's have some fun, that's the word. Alright, so PBR stands for physically based rendering. It's kind of new. It's not really new. It's pretty quickly becoming the de facto rendering pipeline or rendering style used in most game studios in the industry, and a lot of other places too, for a lot of reasons, ranging from physical accuracy of the materials to accuracy on the physics of light. There's some production benefits in terms of, you know, there's less guesswork that you have to do. It's easier to keep things consistent between engines and also artists. You know, if you have, you know, certain things that are already predetermined, it just makes it easier for multiple people to be working on the same project and get similar styles and results and everything. And so yeah, but to really understand the biggest differences between PBR and what used to happen, you kind of have to go back a little bit. So I think we're gonna start by going back in time a little bit and seeing what we used to do. So this was the previous, like this is the quote-unquote traditional set of maps that an asset would use. So you'd have a diffuse map, you'd have a specular map, and you'd have a normal map. You know, the normal map uses, you know, the RGB colors to kind of encode the direction of the surface at the polygon level. In X, Y, and Z, you know, three-dimensional space. And so you get like all of your bumps and your ridges, you know, maybe like, you know, the slight little decals or whatever, the smooth curvature along a round piece when, you know, in reality the mesh isn't actually round. But the normal map will help kind of even that out a bit. The specular map is really like how much reflection there is at any one point, and what kind of coloration of that reflection happens. So, you know, shiny blue metal, you know, any reflection that gets reflected out, you know, gets colored blue at that point or whatever. And then the diffuse map is, you know, the paint colors, the color of the material underneath, but also includes things like shadows for self-shadowing, you know, like cavities, things like that. You know, whiteness in certain areas or whatever. And so there's a lot that kind of gets baked into the diffuse map as well. So between those three maps, you know, that's how assets used to be made. But you know, some of the pitfalls of these were, you know, with the diffuse mapping, getting like shadows and things baked in. You know, a lot of times shadows are dependent on the lighting of a scene, and so a high, if you have, especially environmental assets, is where it really paid a lot of attention. The differences in lighting, you have a high noonday time scene, and then you have sunset. The angles of the light are different, the color of the light is completely different, and so the shadows are different too, and then nighttime shadows are even more different. And so a lot of times, if you wanted really high fidelity art assets, you'd have to remake those assets for the different lighting conditions they'd be under. Another thing is very dynamic assets, like for instance maybe a gun in a first-person shooter. If you got too detailed in the lighting, then when you passed in certain, dynamic areas, maybe there's not a whole lot of lights, but there's a ton of shadows on your gun. Well, that may not make a whole lot of sense, or maybe there's, really strong underlight, but all of the shadows on your gun are as if the light was from above. Then, that also doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you don't put enough lighting detail onto your model in the diffuse map, then then it just looks flat and boring. So it wasn't very dynamic, so people were looking for better ways to go about this. I almost forgot, as we go through, I'm going to try and reference in the bottom right hand corner URLs of where I got my images from. There's a lot of stuff out there on PBR, and it's all really good. And I'll have a list of articles, that some of the main ones that I used when I was compiling this stuff at the end of the talk. But just as we go through the images that I use, I'll try and reference where I got them in the URL at the bottom right corner there. So, anyways, moving on. So this is the kind of traditional method, and you can see also there's a comparison between a traditional shader and a PBR shader, and there's quite a marked difference there, especially in the lens there and the metal on the cartridge. It looks much more metal-y or whatever. So PBR kind of changed some of that. So it got rid of the specular map and changed it to a metalness and a roughness map. And then the diffuse map becomes the albedo map, which, the differences there is that the albedo is literally just the color, the underlying color of the material. Metalness is how reflective a thing is, and the roughness map has to do with microsurface detail. The URL in white there is a really great article that covers basically what PBR is, kind of in depth, and really great reference. But the main difference between a traditional content pipeline and a PBR content pipeline is about a mentality of asset creation. In a traditional content pipeline, everything you're doing is this is what I want the end result to look like, or whatever. Whereas in a PBR pipeline, there's some of that, but it's more about materials. It's about I want this to be wood, I want this to be metal, and you're figuring out what a thing is made of, and then that influences everything moving forward. And there's still plenty of stylistic choices. It can be wood, but what does wood look like? How stylized is it? How realistic is it? But there's certain properties of wood, how reflective it is, that kind of stuff, that are pretty consistent and helps inform the user. Even if it's this totally blue wood can still look like wood, if you use the right metalness and roughness maps and whatnot. So that's the main kind of mental shift that happens in a PBR pipeline, is you're thinking about materials more than kind of your end target. And your end target gets, I think, improved in that way. Everything is more recognizable. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, and so in addition to thinking about materials, the other thing about PBR is that it tries to, as much as possible, not reflect is the wrong word. Reproduce. It tries to reproduce how light actually behaves when it interacts with objects in the engine. And that's how you get, physically accurate looking things. So there's kind of two main different ways that light interacts with two different objects. There's the diffuse of an object is, when light hits an object and changes properties because it gets absorbed into the material. Everything that gets pushed out is what's left, and it gets bounced off in all directions. But that's the diffuse material. So wood absorbs, or red paint rather. Let's go red paint. Red paint will absorb everything in the light spectrum except the red, and that's what gets pushed out afterwards. The specularity light is light that just gets bounced off without getting absorbed by the material at all. And the differences between metals and non-metals is that balance there. Non-metals primarily absorb light, with small exceptions, either brown or blue or whatever. Everything gets absorbed, and then that's what comes out. Whereas metals primarily don't absorb any light, and they reflect all of it. But the key thing about that is that there's a energy conservation principle there. So either the amount of energy going in matches the amount of energy going out. So the more reflective you get, it's impossible to have your underlying material affect that more. And so the principles of energy the principle of energy conservation says that there's a linear relationship between how much light is absorbed by the material and how much light is reflected out, and that stays the same. So the other thing, or the next kind of material principle of light that the PBR pipeline tries to replicate is microsurface detail or roughness. You see that up in the left-hand corner, where the light comes in at a certain angle, but nothing is ever perfectly smooth, and so a really rough surface, even if it's perfectly metal, and so therefore, like the all of the colors of the reflection, get pushed out 100%. If it's rough, that gets blurred out because all of the angles of the light get scattered in random directions or whatever. And so that's where the roughness comes in. And then there's the Fresnel effect, which is basically the natural phenomenon that at a perfectly perpendicular angle, 100% of light is reflected, and at more oblique angles, less gets reflected. And there's a common misconception where a lot of more organic materials aren't really shiny or don't really have any Fresnel. That's what a lot of the traditional pipelines kind of produce, but that's not true. And so we have some examples here, where there's a brick, which is and a brick on top and cardboard underneath. Where when you look at it straight on, there's not a lot of reflection there. But when you look at it from the side, you can really see how shiny and how much specular light gets kind of bounced. And so everything has Fresnel, and PBR kind of reflects that. And so even if you have really rough surface, even if you have a very diffuse surface and not so much of a specular surface, you still have Fresnel. You still are bouncing light at oblique angles. So and that's how you get these metalness maps and the roughness maps. Roughness is all about that microsurface detail. How polished is it? Metalness is typically it's white and black. There's not a whole lot of in between. It's pretty polarized. And then you might have some further maps which can always be combined, like an ambient occlusion map, where in the crevices of an object, light bounces on the surface multiple times, and each time it bounces, more of the light gets absorbed, and so it comes out less. And most engines will take the metalness maps and the roughness maps and the ambient occlusion maps, and they'll layer that into a single image, so that you're not using 7 different images for a single asset. Metalness would go in, say, the R channel. The roughness might go in the albedo channel. The ambient occlusion in the green channel. The albedo map obviously uses RGB 3 because it's about the underlying colors, but further maps can be layered better. So that's kind of the underlying light properties and physics that PBR tries to replicate. So just in terms of physical accuracy, that's how this stuff happens. And that previously, it was really hard to do. You had to figure it out beforehand and bake it in. It wasn't always accurate. But the advantages of these pipelines is that you can create an asset, and then changing all of these lighting conditions, it's the same asset, but it behaves the way you would expect it to, it behaves the way you would expect it to. It's believable, and you also don't need multiple assets in multiple different lighting conditions. So Francisco wants to know how the maps are created or generated. So going back to here, honestly, you'd paint them. The values that you get, oftentimes, especially for roughness or metalness or whatever, you would get source them. So you'd be like, gold has a metalness value of from 0 to 1, like maybe 0.97 or whatever. In a scientific laboratory setting, if everything is perfect, pure metal should have a metalness value of 1, and non-metal should have a metalness value of 0. But nothing's ever perfect, and so you can get the source there. And there's tons of resources available to get those bunch of publicly accessible libraries saying, okay, here's your settings for wood, here's your settings for paint, here's your settings for plastic, for plaster, for concrete, for iron, copper, steel. Here's brushed steel, here's polished steel, here's sanded steel or whatever. So you get those settings, and then in a project like 3D Code, you would set up your material where, okay, so this is brushed silver, and so then as you paint the areas on your object that are silver, it would encode both data to the albedo map, to the metalness map, the roughness map, and so on and so forth. The occlusion maps would get baked from your high poly model to your lower poly model, and so basically the software that you use either bakes that data down from your high poly model to your lower poly model in the same way that normals get baked, or you're painting it as you apply the materials. So so the rubber hose there, you can see in the roughness map is very gray, because it's, there's a lot of micro detail on rubber, a lot of pitting of the material. The metalness map is basically pure black because it's not metal. It's very organic. It doesn't have a lot. And so metalness and roughness and albedo would be painted. Ambient occlusion would be, and any height maps and whatnot would be baked. And the sources that you get from those would likely be gotten from some sort of library that you find, or there are a couple tools out there where you can import, pictures and various, angles and whatnot, and be like, okay, based on these pictures, these are the settings for these materials or whatever. So another thing is there's a going back to the believability here. You can see on these assets like the metalness, the shield and the blade of the sword look like metal. The wood has a softness but also a sturdiness to it. There's a lot of believability that you get there, and so it's and then like I said earlier, again, another advantage of PBR is consistency among artists. You can once you have those values, you're like, okay, we're using these values for wood. You pass it around, and any asset that someone makes with wood, they're like, they just need to use those settings, and instantly their asset matches everything else. You don't need to worry about slight color changes, or oh well, this looks different on their screen than it does on mine and whatnot. If it's wood, it'll use these settings and it'll look the same. And so that's really nice if you have large teams or separated teams or whatever. It really helps production pipelines, and even using the settings between maybe a character artist and environment artist for fabrics. One of them is making tapestries, and the other one is making clothing or whatever. But as long as they still look like they're the same kind of cloth, it looks like it belongs in the same world, and it looks everything looks more like they belong together, and that's a huge boon for creating believable worlds. A lot of PBR is often shown trying to mirror real life stuff, but then the question becomes, okay, well, that's great that you can make something look more realistic by obeying the physics of light, but can you do stylized art with PBR? And the answer is yes. You can very easily make stylized art, and in fact, I would argue that PBR makes stylized art better, because even if the geometry isn't realistic, even if wood doesn't look exactly like wood in real life, you'd still want it to obey the physics of light. You still want blue light to be reflected off of, you know, steel metal the same way that it would in real life. You know, and you can still get a real heavy sense of style, of cartoon, of life, of fun into these assets. But now they're more believable. Now they are, they're more consistent. Production speed increases, all that. And so, yes, you can definitely do stylized art. And that's the direction we're going in Redwall. We're not trying to make realistic looking stone. We're not trying to make realistic castles, partly because we don't have it's just never been our thing, and it's also not Redwall's thing. Redwall isn't about realism. There's an amount of fantasy, not high fantasy, but there's an amount of storytelling and suspension of disbelief there that's important, and I think realism would detract from that. But also there's just so much character and personality that trying to make it look too real would really detract from the sense of wild imagination that I think is really fostered in the books. But you still, even in your mind's eye, when things aren't quite the way they are in real life, there's still a real place to you. When I read those books, the animals aren't sized the same way. Certain things aren't quite the same way as they are in real life, but it's still a real place to me. And that's what I like about PBR, is that you can have things that are, on the one hand, look obviously that is not real, and yet it is totally a real place. And like, that sentence doesn't necessarily make sense. But I think I hope that what I'm trying to say is coming across to you guys. It's not... Yeah. Light is important, and that's kind of what PBR does, even when you're stylized. So, Francisco's question of how we get those maps, how are they generated? 3D Coat is a big piece of software that we use that has really done a lot to enable us to use this pipeline. I'll just play. I'll play this video while I talk about it. There we go. The music isn't overcoming me. 3D Coat is a new software in the industry, and it's also new to us. But it has really done a lot for us in terms of its ability, just in terms of stuff it already has. Taking those normal maps and baking out curvature maps and ambient occlusion maps and height maps and stuff like that. It's a pretty fully featured piece of software that really, like, you can do pretty much entire asset creation, and it has a really good sculpting engine. It has a great retopo engine where you take the high poly model and create a low poly model out of it. Good unwrapping tools, really blow most everything that I've seen out of the water, and then it's painting tools, allowing me to paint various degrees of metalness or roughness, you know, into the different materials that I'm working with. And it just maybe all that. It's really great. I can't say enough good things about 3D Coat, how much I like it, and how much it's really helped us adapt physically based rendering into our asset pipeline and take advantage of it in Redwall. So it's a great tool. The community behind it is also very awesome. The developers engage with the community all the time. You know, just recently they, you know, responded to a thread that we had where, you know, people were talking about how there was some feature involving the automatic retopology tools that wasn't quite working as people were expecting, and so, you know, developer chimed in. It's like, okay, so you guys aren't quite liking how this is happening, and so we've changed the entire feature, and it's working in a completely different way now, and we think you're gonna like it, and you know, in the next release it's coming out. So, you know, here's a video of me showing how it's gonna work in the future. I hope you like it. And that was just like, just to see a developer respond to the community, trying to problem solve with, you know, you guys are right, this is a non-optimal workflow. Let's just change it so that it works better for you guys. That's I love that. I love using products developed by people who communicate with the users, you know, and say, you know, this is what you guys want, so here you go. Or this isn't quite working for you, and, you know, we have reasons for doing it the way that we did it, but you know, in the real world, it's just not cutting it. So let's adapt. So yeah. Just to reiterate, if there are any questions, please ask. I'd be more than happy to answer. And yeah. So 3D Coat is the one of the primary things we're using to develop our assets for Redwall. But it is there we go. Okay, but it's not the only one. You know, we still use Blender, and you know, kind of the two different. You know, there's some things that Blender does that 3D Coat doesn't do. You know, animation and rigging. 3D Coat doesn't do that, and you know, I learned a lot of my 3D modeling skills in Blender, and so the low poly stuff for me is easier in Blender. Although the 3D Coat tools for its rig topology tools, its low poly modeling tools, are just getting better and better, and the more that I use it, the quicker that's going to be as well. But sometimes you know, prototyping in Blender is just a little quicker, especially for assets where I need to spend 2 minutes making something that will get updated later. But you know, 3D Coat is great about taking those assets and importing them in and being like, okay, this is cool, now let's make it 2,000 times better. So I still use both Blender and 3D Coat to make my 3D assets. Yeah. Right. And here is a small wall of text on a bunch of different articles that I referenced, and really assembling the type of stuff I want to talk to you guys today about. Marmoset in particular has a great series of posts written by them about PBR and what it is and how it works and why you should use it and how to adapt your game pipeline to it. And then, Pixar was a real big pioneer in the PBR world about, helping develop certain pieces of it. And, Monsters University is a great example of them using it to overcome all of the complexities inherent with fur. And then the last one, the Unity, again, going back to Francisco's question about where you get those things, that article specifically has a bunch of values that you would use for various materials and whatnot as examples. But it's also just in general, this is how you're going to think about your assets and whatnot. Francisco asks, does knowledge of Blender carry over to 3D Coat? Yeah, especially in terms of how you're creating your meshes, the underlying geometry. This is, this rhombus is really just a cube, skewed or whatever. Definitely, there's some carryover there, especially with underlying modeling principles. In terms of key combos, not so much, but that's going to be true anytime you switch software suites, and that just comes down to muscle memory. The more you use a product, the better your the better your key combos, key shortcuts. You'll remember them better. So that's just a time thing. But yeah, I mean, if you've used Blender before, it doesn't take too long to get used to 3D Coat. And I had a thought and it just escaped me. Watching tutorials. I did this thing in Blender and I want to do it in 3D Coat. How do I? The community, the 3D Coat community is great about that. And a bunch of people posted videos showing it too. Tutorial videos will help a lot. Yeah. If there's any other questions, I'd love to answer them regarding PBR in general, or any art pipeline questions for Redwall. Looking at the time here, we're a little early, but yeah.
If you got a little time, we could maybe just, and if there's an audience, we could do a little bit of Q&A if you wanted.
And that's, if you guys have any questions, ask them.
Where are we looking for?
Emily
Emily's
is
texting.
Emily's texting you.
Yes.
One more question and then you can carry on.
Okay. Will there be any fuzzball designs in Redwall for characters?
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Like.
Super fluffy, basically a design with lots of hair that's just puffed out completely around the character.
So you mean Dibbins?
Oh, okay. Like
a Pomeranian?
like fluffy.
Like a Pomeranian.
Like a Pomeranian. Maybe. The Dibbins have softer fur, and so there's certainly potential for that. It's probably not gonna. I don't think you're gonna see any tribbles.
Aww.
But I mean, yeah, there's different species have different amounts of fur, and of course, yeah, the younger you go, the more fuzzy you get.
Did you want to talk about Neofur and Imperial Fur? Did we go, or was that a different topic?
Totally different topic. I mean, I can talk about it a little bit.
Well, let me see if I got this right. We had talked about using Neofur as a plugin, Unity plugin, and we were pretty excited about it. Like, it had a really great demo, but it appears that they've stopped supporting it, and we all
No,
no.
that's not it.
What is the deal?
Well, the reason why we're not using Neofur is honestly comes down to a pipeline issue. Like the amount of time it would take to switch all of our production pipeline and whatnot to use that just for this game isn't really possible.
Yeah, we decided against it.
Yeah,
but then found out that they weren't canceling it anyway.
Well, no, they're not canceling Neofur. They're not.
They're not selling any more licenses.
They are currently not accepting new licenses, but we already got a license. But they're in some sort of company transition, so they're currently suspending it, but they're not dropping the product. So
I suspect they're
spread,
dropping it.
Don't spread false information.
Okay, fair enough. But right now is at least ambiguous right now, and that's a
They said
that's a
they're
problem.
going to finish the product and then come back.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know when that would be. The point I just wanted to make is, as much as we were interested in Neofur, we've decided against it. And right now, I think Imperial Fur is our first choice, but I suppose we are open to other choices. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, not for this game, but yes.
Yeah. So the fur ball question is what made me think about it. Is that Neofur certainly made big fur ball things look. They would look really cool based on their demo. Like they did a great job with that plugin. So I shed a little tear over that. Okay. Did we have any other questions or?
I don't know, Emily. Are there any other questions in chat? What's the general mood in chat?
Is Emily listening to you on delay?
I don't know. Hey Emily,
That's good.
what's the
That's
general?
all.
That's all. There's no more questions. What's the general mood in chat?
They're talking about fuzzy otters and squirrels.
Fuzzy otters.
Fuzzy
and
otters. The
squirrels.
squirrel tail is definitely a thing that we got to figure out
Yeah,
the deal.
that's gonna be an interesting one for sure. So
I realize that we've been looking for some other things that we're going to do on these streams, and do we have anything on the schedule settled in for next week? I will be out of town, so we can't play GURPS.
We're thinking maybe we're going to switch our game stream and our GURP stream.
Okay, so we'll do a team game next week. All right. Well, anyways, I just wanted to say hi, sit down with you.
hi,
Good
Chris.
job on the presentation.
Thank you. So, yeah, PBR is it's a thing I campaigned for in the company last year because I believe in it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's been working out pretty well so far.
It's been really nice.
And there's, I hear from some artists like, if you're doing stylized work, like PBR isn't the right tool for you. But I mean, as you saw from some images before, like it's just not necessarily true. It's all about how you use it. And for me, as a technical artist, I think of things as, the underlying stuff. Like that's just how my brain works. And so for me, PBR is perfect because all I have to think about is, this asset is wood with these metal brackets and whatever, and then it matches everything else.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of creative opportunities there for what does wood look like. Once you are deciding on how much edges there are or not, like it looks right. So I like that. Sherry asks, will the game be smaller child friendly? I guess it depends on how small you're talking about. My baby girl Isabel is 11 months old, and she's probably not going to be able to play it.
I don't know that that's the question.
But I just as an example of that's definitely not. But I mean, John, did you have something to say to that question?
I was going to say my 3 months will end up playing, and they're going to be 6, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think the right answer is that we have two bumps in our demographic. One is the same demographic that the books are sold at, which is basically tweens. And so, use parental judgment with that regard, but it will be friendly for tweens in the same way that the books are friendly. So, you got to keep in mind that that's not the same as what, you might see in VeggieTales, as an example. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the game is interesting and fun for adults who read the book and maybe they want to introduce their kids to it. So we're trying to hit both demographics. But by and large, you should count it as like an E or maybe a light T. We got a T rating on G Prime. What? Because he mentions a cigar once.
I thought it was E10.
Maybe it was E10. So
E10 is probably going to be
that.
That's probably where we're at. It's not quite like 5-year-olds, but it's
So that's probably the E10 rating.
Yeah, that's about where we're probably targeting in terms of subject material. Holly asks, do you have to bake some of the light maps into the environment for your game? That's actually one of the things about PBR that's really attractive on the higher performance end, is that you don't have to. Now you still can. If you're worried about performance and you want to optimize that, you can absolutely bake light maps into your environment, and that will save on processing time and allow you to still get a high fidelity look. But it's in nature static. But with PBR, you can totally have totally dynamic lighting. You can have the sun be changing gradually in both position and color. You can have source lights coming around, and that's really where PBR shines the most in terms of awesome looking assets, is when you have these really dynamically lit scenes. Because by nature, again, going back to this map, you have your albedo map, which is the underlying color, your metalness, your roughness. It doesn't show up, but there's also the occlusion map and the height maps. It's all about treating the object as surface types, as opposed to rendering these specific pixels at this specific location. No, you don't have to do that.
Great example. So you see there's that glare right under the collar, and that glare doesn't show up in any of the maps. It's just a result of
the lighting. Yep. And so no, you don't have to bake light maps into your environment for your game. But again, if you want to, if you're concerned about performance, if you want your game to run on lower end machines, you absolutely can. And PBR is still friendly with that pipeline. And it could still be advantageous if that's what you're doing, especially if you have multiple scenes at different times of day. You don't have to worry about creating assets that are optimized for night versus day, or shallow light versus sharp light or whatever, or lots of ambient light versus very focused light, or like a single asset will bake well under all those conditions. You don't need to optimize that. And so Francisco says, I hear pipeline used a lot in terms of 3D animation. What is a pipeline actually made up of? The tears of our souls.
Indeed.
Okay, so pipeline refers to the order of production, basically. So, for example, making a character, you're going to start with concept art. This is... maybe even start before that with literary concepts. You're describing the character. What are the emotions that the character has? What are the emotions that this character should evoke in the player? How do they behave or whatever? And then you start concepting the character. Are they sharp? Are they soft? Are they, lots of angular things, lots of curves? Whatever, you come up with the concept of the character. Then from there it gets modeled. Usually you either depending on whether or not it's organic or not, like each artist either starts with the low poly and then adds the detail with high poly, or they start with the high poly because it's organic, whatever, and they sculpt it, and then they do the low poly over the top of it. But regardless, that would be the next step, is where you model the character, and then you unwrap them, which is basically turning your 3D model into a 2D organization of all the squares, and then from there it gets textured. After that point, it gets sent to the rigger, who takes your previously static model and says, okay, we're going to be moving at these points. You know, here's your shoulder joint, here's your elbow joint, here's your hip joint, here's your knee joint. You know, these bones can move along these axes, and these bones can move along those ones. You know, adding in extra controls for the next step, which is the animator, who then takes this all of a sudden dynamic object, and then he's able to move it, animate it. You know, here's your walk cycle, here's your jump cycle, whatever. Then after that, you bring it into the engine, you apply all the different texture maps to the material, you blend all of the different animations into this controller, you apply all of your scripts, and all of a sudden you have this controllable, dynamic creature, character, person, whatever. So that's what a pipeline is. It's the order of production. Especially if you have different people at each of those stages, or different people you know, working on, you know, different types of assets. You know, if you have one person who's working on interior environments, and one person who's working on exterior environments, and another person working on good characters, and another person working on bad characters, and you know, you want all of that stuff to look like it belongs in the same game. So a pipeline that is designed to standardize certain aspects of that process, especially in the texturing process. You know, if something is made of linen, you know, this is how it's supposed to look, no matter what it is. If it's made of linen, this is what linen looks like, kind of thing. That's one of the strengths of PBR in terms of pipeline optimization. You define it once, and then everyone can be like, oh, well, this character has a linen t-shirt, and over here is a linen banner, and over here is a linen sack of potatoes. And, you know, they all look like linen.
Yeah, and so Francisco, from the project management, pipeline is all about making sure the steps go in the right order so that you don't have to do stuff multiple times unnecessarily. There's a huge time-saving element there where, as the way that Gavin described it, if you wind up making a change to the character's geometry, that's going to affect every single step that comes after that step. And so you really want to avoid that as much as possible so you're not doing work 15 times. So places where the pipeline is either independent of certain things, like Gavin said, like not having to do the linen 15 times for 15 characters, is a gigantic savings. Not to mention, it looks consistent.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Any other questions? How you guys doing? Having fun today?
All right.
Having a good spring break?
I'm out.
Peace, Chris.
Thanks, Gavin.
Spring break has been good here in the office. We're having some great sunshine here in Oregon, which, after all the rain that we've had, is nice. I mean, I am an Oregonian at heart, and I love rain, but you know, sunshine is pretty nice too. You know, April showers bring May flowers, kind of thing. So, coming up on the end of the hour. So, any more questions that you have, ask them now before we say goodbye. But I don't know. I felt like this has gone pretty well. I really enjoyed sharing with you guys something that's, you know, important to me, that I, you know, have a real passion about. And yeah, so this has been fun. I've enjoyed it. I hope you guys have too. Anything, Emily?
That's it.
That's it. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your spring break. We certainly will. Viva la Redwall. Eulalia. Bye.